If we could call to order and all rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Fryrick?
Here.
Mr. Posnell?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
I saw him here. He must be muted.
Okay. Mr. Sanders?
Here.
Mr. Scalette?
Here.
Mrs. Schrader?
Here.
Mr. Sears?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Mr. Tillman?
Here. And I'm here, I'm muted.
Thank you.
Okay. Please silence your cell phones for the duration of this meeting. And this will be a first opportunity for public comment. And I believe that there were 3 a few minutes ago.
0. Okay.
So if you guys would like to take a few minutes and read, you can see them from the link online, or I think Wendy's got them up as well. I'll give everybody a few minutes.
We actually have one addition, which will or maybe not.
Only see 3.
I only seen 3.
Wow. I'm trying. I apologize. This is the content.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to read?
Yeah, I remember 4.
Thank you. You have before you the combined planning committee and regular monthly meeting of June 15th and the special meeting of July 13th. Are there any corrections or changes?
John, if I could just ask a question, as part of that meeting on the 13th, we had asked for some changes in wording to the making stronger language in the safety plan for the extracurriculars. Is that updated version someplace, or could that be sent to us, please?
Tim?
Weren't there supposed to be some revisions prior?
Yeah, yes, those revisions were updated. It is posted on the web. I will send an updated link. The link that's live on the web is the one with the updated language.
Where do we find those links? Real quick, Dr. Krauser, where do I find that?
That one is located on the athletics page.
Okay.
Yeah, both in the frequently asked questions areas as well as the front page of the athletics section.
Okay. If you send that, I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Krauser.
You bet.
Okay, if there are no additions or changes, they can be approved as submitted. And Mr. Sears.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Our estimated interest for the month of June was only $3,970. And we currently have no active CDs, so we're waiting for tax money to roll in so we can earn some interest. Tonight, again, we have a consent agenda. Would any board member like any of the items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous vote call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
I do not have a report, so we can go directly to Dr. Williams.
Good evening, everybody. I have tonight's superintendent's report is going to have the timely topic of school reopening and health safety plans. As you know, the landscape changes daily, and as we're going to see from this report, it actually changes by the minute sometimes. On July 16th at 2:42 p.m., and I mentioned the time because that's going to be significant in a few minutes, at 2:42 on Thursday afternoon, we distributed a draft of the health and safety plan via email to parents and staff. And the plan, we built this plan based on some guidance from the Bucks County Health Department, because York County doesn't have a health department. So we looked around at the other county health departments to find out who might have some good guidance. And it appears that Bucks County was kind of leading the effort to provide guidance to schools. So we relied heavily on their guidance, and their guidance basically talked about 3 feet of distance for students and staff. We also relied on the World Health Organization, the WHO, who also was talking about 3 feet of distance. And we also took into consideration the American Academy of Pediatrics, which didn't weigh in on the distancing, but did talk a little bit about the social emotional well-being of students and how school is helpful for them. So we based our guidance on Thursday at 2:42, that we released at 2:42 on Thursday, based on those 3 organizations. And we believed at the elementary level we could maintain 3 feet of distance. At the high school, we didn't think we could do that with roughly 1,000 bodies in buildings. So we decided to go with hybrid for that, for those grade levels, for the secondary schools, for the middle school and the high school. Because if you think about it, a caseload of students for a primary teacher is probably about 21 students. Intermediate teacher could be anywhere from 24 to 48 students. And at the secondary level, middle school and high school, you're talking about 110 students per teacher. So if you're full on in-person instruction, a secondary teacher would come in contact with about 110 students every day. An intermediate teacher would come in contact with 24 to 48 students, and a primary teacher, roughly 21 students. Now, of course, that doesn't count the other people in the building, the other adults in the building, and the custodians and everybody else. In a hybrid model for the high school, we were able to cut down those interactions from 110 unique individuals with which the teacher would interact down to 55 in a hybrid schedule. So that's why we originally went with a hybrid schedule at the high school and middle school, and full on open at the elementary level, because we believed we could maintain safe distances of 3 feet. Now remember, that was at 2:42 on Thursday, July 16th. At 2:44 on Thursday, July 16th, the Pennsylvania Department of Education released some firmer guidance on distancing, particularly in the dining areas where students would eat lunch. And we felt, after reviewing that guidance over the weekend, we came to the decision on Sunday that we could no longer maintain social distancing the way it was outlined from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we had to shift gears, and we realized we had to make changes. So we're working on those changes and hoping to get changes to you and the public to view sometime this week and for action on August 3rd of 2020. Tonight we'll be recommending that the board approve administrative recommendation for a district-wide hybrid opening pending the board's anticipated approval of the revised health and safety plan on the 3rd of August. And to further outline what's involved in the kinds of educational options and some of the social distancing that we'll be providing, Dr. Krauser has prepared a presentation. He's our pandemic coordinator for this effort, and he's not getting any sleep in preparation for all of this. And he'll outline for you tonight the kinds of things that we have in store for going forward. I'll turn it over to Dr. Krauser.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to quickly share screens here. Get some things squared away. Well, back again for another Monday. As Dr. Williams said, it was a very busy weekend as we kind of digested some new information. My plan for this evening is to share a substantial amount of information with you, which will then provide you 2 weeks to digest the updates that were provided to the draft. And basically what I have this evening is, as Dr. Williams said, the work that was involved in the health and safety plan with this up to minute changes that's coming in as we're kind of pivoting and responding to what we're receiving, as well as the instructional plan modes of instruction that we're able to offer our families. So it's a lot to digest, as I mentioned. There'll be some time at the end to answer any questions. But again, tonight's motion isn't on the health and safety plan. You'll get a draft by the end of this week. And I do have a timeline at the end of this that I'll be able to share with you. So really breaking into 2 parts tonight, I want to talk about the health and safety plan and the updates, as well as the instructional model. But first, as always, I'd like to provide a little bit about how the plan began with setting some stages for our mission and vision, so working with the district's philosophy, but really breaking down our options in our guiding beliefs into 2 areas. As I mentioned in the athletic planning, we had a purpose to ensure that we are providing safety, to provide opportunities for students beyond the academic program. This one in particular was really to focus again on what are our opportunities and educational experiences that we can have for our students, but also with a firm focus on safety and what we're doing inside the facilities, inside our practices and habits to ensure the safety for all of our students, staff, and the community at large. And we'll talk more about COVID and the community responsibilities. So embarking on this challenge, we certainly know there's existing challenges. One of the early commitment challenges we found was this conflict where, you know, we're seeking to develop an optimal in-person learning environment, but we also know that we need to reduce the transmission in our community. And that's the guidance that we've been getting and the direction we've been getting from the state, and what our roles and responsibilities are as a institution that comes together and gathers. And certainly when we're hearing information from the state regarding the number of people that should be gathering in one area and what we're doing to reduce that spread. Number 2, as Dr. Williams said it, I mean, is really in the minutes. I think I said at the athletic plan, you know, in schools, we often talk about planning for 2 months, and in the athletic, we're planning 2 weeks. We're really down to 2 days now. And in the case, it was really within minutes. The information is coming very frequently. It's changing very fast, and we want to make sure we're pivoting and responding appropriately. We also know going into this that there are some physical constraints. We were gracious enough to receive grant money, roughly $530,000, but there are some constraints that we have with regards to what's possible within our financial opportunity. For example, a massive overhaul of transportation. You know, we just can't hire a whole nother set of staff to split students. We don't have another facility to stick students in. So there are some guidelines that we have to keep under our eyes of fiscal responsibility. The scope, really, when we think about the tentacles of this, it impacts all the areas of education with regard to the classroom, the extracurriculars, the communication, the transportation, and then that interconnected piece to our families. So it basically covers every single thing we do. Cafeterias, all things that education offers. Timeline, as Dr. Williams said, it's important that we're making decisions that we can provide time for families to prepare for changes, as well as our staff. We want to make sure we're providing enough time for staff to prepare professionally on what they need to do to meet the needs of the students, either in a hybrid opportunity or an online opportunity. And lastly, throughout this challenge, which began really in May when we started to have this pandemic planning, there's some virtual living changes that people are going through. Communicating, planning, and engaging in a virtual environment is still challenging for some individuals. This board has gotten very accustomed to it. We're gathering on Mondays and we're becoming very used to it, but still there's a challenge with how we're communicating with hardware and each one of those items. So as we kind of kicked things off and moved into the health and safety plan, there's a couple key takeaways. As I said, with the athletic plan, the state, Pennsylvania Department of Education provides a template, and that template was allowing us as a framework to build our plan. It does embed some certain requirements, but that template is built upon the governor's color phase distinctions, which is a contingent design because it's subject to change upon the governor's orders. And I think even most recently, and we think about the current changes, we're not changing color distinctions, but we're seeing changes that are ebb and flowing in regarding to the structures of what we do to plan. And as Dr. Williams mentioned, the Thursday release was a pretty substantial change in that direction. If we go back 2 weeks ago, the mask order by the Secretary Levine was another change in that direction. So the second key point is all of the actions that we're building within that plan, we're building off the current guidance that we're receiving from CDC, the PA Department of Health, Pennsylvania Department of Education, of course, the governor's office. We are focused on developing. There is a requirement that we select an option in which that we're going to have our options for learning in this year. So we have an educational option, and this plan that we're going to be sharing, as Dr. Williams mentioned and communicated with the community on Sunday evening, is a hybrid option for K-12 as well as a full-time online option. And I'm going to get into both of those with a greater level of specificity tonight, but also share with you a timeline of how we're opening that opportunities to families to engage in a little deeper conversation about what opportunity may meet their families' needs at the current time. And lastly, as I kind of shared with the athletic plan, the COVID-19 health and safety education is part of that plan. We are an institution that's designed to teach and grow students. So embedded in the plan is our roles and responsibilities to help communicate hygiene practices as well as educate the adults in what they're doing in their hygiene practices and communicating in essence what we're doing as a safety measure. So that's a large part of this plan as it moves through. As Dr. Williams said, the plan did require certain elements that we had to break down. We created a pandemic team. I was fortunate enough to be the coordinator for that. Excited, and I will say it was exciting because we had a robust collection of volunteers, as well as some that we reached out to kind of embark on that challenge with us. It ranged from teachers to community members, administrators, representatives from the association, our YSEA. We had certainly our nurses involved in that. So we had a large range of communication. We also had survey input from both our staff and our community, our parents and guardians. The next part of that is, again, the type of reopening, which we talked about, which will be the hybrid option, K-12, and/or an online option for families. Those major key strategies that we need to address, and we'll go over tonight. And then the professional development and communication. And then, as Dr. Williams mentioned, lastly, a recommendation for an August 3rd action on approval. So this plan, you'll have, as he mentioned, an update this week that you'll have some time to digest and move forward. So what I'd like to do is talk about each one of these sections. And then again, as I said, we'll have some time at the end to address some details. You'll certainly have time to review this plan in its entirety. I tried to highlight with a double star to indicate, as Dr. Williams mentioned, some of the items that have been most recently updated with new guidance from the CDC and what we did to make some changes to the overall plan when you see them. So first and foremost, the facilities and district cleaning, and I'll say Barry and his crew have been great with getting down to the conversations about what's possible, what we can accomplish with our current staff and our supplies, and then certainly what we need to order. And we've been busy ordering supplies to make sure that we're meeting the CDC guidance for those cleaning supplies. We're also ensuring that we're meeting the registered EPA disinfectant list. So we're making sure the supplies that we're getting do meet those minimum criteria as set forth from CDC. A couple quick items that we're going to be doing to ensure that the cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting ventilation is on par. These are part of the plan, and some have been add-ons that we've adjusted slightly with the language, certainly from your feedback as a board, with a little bit more strict adherence to the language, as well as the most recent feedback from the state. One of the, during the planning process, we heard a loud cry from the teachers to be involved in that process. So how we can support them in the classrooms. Cleaning kits are going to be provided to classrooms so that we can do that quick, high touch, high frequency spots as needed. Students and staff will disinfect their hands after using shared equipment. We're going to talk more about our reduction of shared equipment in the plan too, to do that. Ventilation will be increased through our air handlers, windows, and doors. Barry and his team have been working hard to make sure that our filter system, our air handlers are up to date and being refreshed so that they're working at their highest level. When weather's appropriate, we have the ability to open windows, and when rooms have windows that do open, as well as opening classroom doors to do two things. One, it increases the air exchange, and number two, it reduces the high touch areas. So we're not opening, closing with door handles, we're allowing ventilation to occur. On a hybrid model, the kind of the response or the I'll say the net result of that is that we have less students in the hallway, less students in the building. So we are able to open up our doors with less disruption, and it doesn't impact the educational environment, which is continuing to be our response as we move through this. How are we doing this the best to meet the needs of our learners? We have access, actually already turned off our water fountains. We're being notations on that. At the younger age, the students know that they're not operational and they just don't touch them on their own. And of course, the signage for safe and best practices will be displayed throughout the buildings, and we'll talk more about how that consistent messaging occurs. Some of the larger items we talk about social and physical distancing and the other safety protocols. In general, we're focusing on building schedules in the building that are static. That keeps our cohort of students together and in place, and it reduces the movement of students across the building. As Dr. Williams mentioned, when we think about that smaller age group, by having half numbers now, we're able to be even more static in our scheduling to reduce those movements. The next two items were direct changes from the updates from the CDC's release, or the guidance, the guidance from the PA, Department of Education, with limiting the number of individuals and interactions between groups. And what that was our very specific actions to reduce the number of students in classrooms and thus the hybrid model. Again, at least 6 feet of separation among students and staff throughout the day. It's not where feasible, it's a motion that we're going to make those actions happen, and we can accomplish those tasks with smaller number of students. The face coverings has been part of the plan, but I want to make sure I'm bringing that back up to the point that the protective face covering is worn in accordance with the PA Department, Secretary Levine's order that went out in July. And that's very succinct. When you leave your home, you're required to wear a face mask. Students and staff and adults will be required to wear a face mask on site. The only variation is during eating. And I'll kind of jump down to the first item under the cafeteria item, as Dr. Williams mentioned. That 6-foot social distancing minimum during the cafeteria or feeding times was a big catalyst of our change, that we could not meet that under a current all-in scenario, and that's where we made that change. But that is one area and one exception. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but certainly the conversation about face masks does come up. As we're reading and reading that order, it does allow for students to remove face masks when they're outdoors or in an area where they can achieve a 6 feet social distancing. So we are putting in measures in place that, let's say, for example, we're outside, there are mask breaks. We're embedding that into the process. It is advised by PDE that we embed mask breaks for students, but we must adhere to a minimum of 6 foot social distancing and create an opportunity for as much air exchange in those processes as well. Last, a couple items under general. Again, we have an employee, a non-essential personnel visiting process where they're not permitted beyond our vestibule entrances. Those will also be secured with plexiglass shields, hand sanitizing in key areas. And of course, that reference that we're saying, as Dr. Williams references, the PDE guidance that was released on their new website on the 16th of July. Classroom, under the current approach, we can now make classroom seating 6 foot apart and facing the same direction. Limited number of individuals in classrooms, and that's again another one of those large items that allowed us to have to come back and reflect on what the current plan was doing to ensure that we're creating a 6 foot zone around those students in the classrooms during the learning time. Adequate supplies to, again, minimize the sharing of touch materials. So what we're doing right now is we're going through all the materials, what's shared in the classroom that we, as a necessity, must be, had additional supplies, or ones that can be cleaned appropriately in between the sharing of resources. I'm going to highlight that as an important piece because I want to come back to this as we talk about the instructional model, about the sharing of resources and our ability to clean them, because that's one of the decisions that helped us come up with our hybrid learning model, where we're doing a day of an A student in and then the next day a B student, rather than doing 2 student days of the same cohort at a time. And a lot of that comes to how we can clean and utilize materials that are also in line with the instructional plan. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then lastly, the cafeteria area, we talk about the 6 foot social distancing, and again, creating those staggered schedules and reducing as many students in the cafeteria as well, and how that continues to unfold. More on the physical distancing. Recess, for example, is again a focused approach at the elementary level to make sure that we're staggering schedules. There's an example there. What I have at the bottom is an image of Indian Rocks Playground, where we now are zoning out students by cohort so that we can not only ensure 6 foot social distancing by activity, by choice of students at the playground, but now we're extending that out by cohort. So we're reducing the number and limited interactions of students in and amongst the school day. And again, I talked about the face cover order by the secretary. Communication. Again, there's that constant and frequent messaging, principals during their morning announcements, communication that's coming out of the building. model behavior that happens from our classroom teachers, as well as what we're sending out from the district level to continue to provide that communication about what we're doing to provide safe and secure features inside the building. And again, that underlying theme of how we're educating the community, as the community of learners, as well as our greater community, with what we're posting in signage, what we're communicating out, inevitably what our role as adults are in this process. We as teachers, we as leaders, model those expectations as well as communicate them. So when it comes down to our behaviors with wearing masks, our behaviors with communicating, hand washing and those kinds of things, pausing for breaks to make sure that we're ensuring that in the curriculum is an important part of that process as well. Transportation. Face covering order, same as before. When students, as per the order, when students leave their home, they are required to wear a face mask. They'll, of course, wear them on the bus for transportation. We are requiring a symptom screening to be required of all students, parents and guardians, prior to the bus stop or a school drop-off every day. Right now, transportation is a contracted service, so we are working very closely with Reliance to make sure that we're coordinating a very specific transportation plan. That will include things like strategic plans for embarking and disembarking the bus. For example, students will have assigned seats. We'll pay very close attention to family units being able to sit together while spacing everyone else. Students that are being picked up first will enter the rear of the bus, and then we would load forward. Those are the examples that are being taken care of at this point. Again, also making sure that we're having, as when weather permitting, as much ventilation as possible on that bus as they're moving through the system. So we've done our best to provide a very succinct and clear safety plan for our facilities. Now it's our task to monitor the student staff health. Screening, it is a required process for the staff as well as the students. I'm going to talk about the tool we're using in the next slide, but it's done every day before school, and no students with symptoms will be sent on that bus or brought to school, as with staff will not be attending school after that self-screening tool is being applied. So our illness protocol section will work as follows. Students or staff who develop symptoms or illness while at school will be isolated immediately. We have two buildings that don't have a separate entrance, but all the other nurses' suites, we're establishing a separate entrance for the entrance of those that are seeking nurses' office as a quarantine area. They'll remain in isolation until we can arrange for a supervised adult pickup, and we're going to establish those guidelines through the nurse's office, because not every incident that's going to come to that nurse's office will be COVID, and the nurses are working on establishing a triaging process to ensure that they're screening and symptoms for COVID versus your standard, you know, I bumped my knee or I have a bellyache, those kinds of things, and that's what's happening during the screening process in the nurse's office. So the next question, and certainly one that we've had a lot of conversations about, is let's respond to a confirmed and probable case. And again, I'll come back to PDE's guidance that was released on Thursday has given much clearer definition to what our responsibilities are and how can we respond to those confirmed and probable cases. The way it's being outlined as to us in this direction as of Thursday, will be the Department of Health or a county health department. We don't have one in per se, but county offices would communicate and notify schools when confirmed cases are being processed through offices. They would then work with the York Suburban Pandemic Crisis Response Team to assess our current risk, our isolation and quarantine recommendations, and any other infectious recommendations that we need to do on site. Very clearly, they state in those guidances that the entire building does not need to be evacuated. It will be addressed individually with consultation from the Department of Health. And of course, you know, with HIPAA, we are ensuring that we're maintaining absolute confidentiality with every individual involved in this process and that process as well. So it kind of works in reverse order as well. When we are being notified by a family of a confirmed case, we are to directly communicate with the Department of Health, and they will provide guidance under their current knowledge of what their relationship is with current other local agencies, their knowledge of contact tracing, and help us make those decisions based on the current recommendations from the Department of Health. So here's the screening tool that's going to be implemented, again, coming from the Department of Education on Thursday's release. It's done each day at school. And basically, students, staff, and parents would work through these series of questions where you're asking yourself, number one, if you have a thermometer or temperature at home, you would take that. But that's not the defining measure as to if you don't have a thermometer, you can't complete the screening. You still can engage in a series of questions that are listed on this page. For example, number one, are you currently taking fever-reducing medicine? If that's a yes, then you're a do not come to school response. Then you would move through any experiences in group A and or group B and aligning your symptoms to be as follows. If you have one or more symptoms from group A or two or more symptoms from group B, you are to stay at home and not come to school. And then communicate, and we would then, of course, communicate with the Department of Health. Now, how do we then monitor that either with a probable case or a confirmed case? Again, guidance has been recently provided with a little bit more specificity from the state in how we're working with the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Department of Health locally with our county emergency agencies. Staff and students with fevers and symptoms associated or confirmed cases, and this is direct from Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Pennsylvania Department of Health, is there to seek medical attention and get further evaluation and guidance from their medical providers. Our responsibility for staff and parents of sick will be advised that they are not to return until they've met the CDC criteria for discontinuation of home isolation. CDC is now providing very distinct guidance on what the isolation process is, and that we, in this process, must complete that quarantining process in its entirety before you are involved in any of the process to return to school. That looks as follows: a fever-free for at least 24 hours. That's a recent change. Just as of, I believe, 4 days ago, don't quote me on that date, it was 72 hours. Now they have reduced that to 24 hours, 10-day symptom-free, and a 14-day quarantine from that positive test. Again, coming back to that direct exposure, they are to follow the probable case guidelines from CDC and move through entire isolation process that CDT is recommending, and that again is coming from our most recent updates from Pennsylvania Department of Education, Department of Health. A staff or student who is quarantined following a close contact with a case may return to work only after they've completed the entire quarantine process. And again, this is a new update. There was some conversation saying, oh, if they have a doctor's excuse that says they can come back, they can come back. That is to our plan, that will not be the case. You must complete the CDC recommended quarantining process in its entirety before we will begin to even engage in the conversation of return process. And then you will be cleared by the Department of Health or our county medical associations. And again, that underlying theme of our educational responsibility. How are we consistently keeping students aware of these signs and symptoms? How are we consistently keeping them aware of what they need to do to monitor those signs and symptoms, both from their internal processes at home, as well as what we're doing with the staff? Signage, reminders, they're again placed throughout the building, as well as communicated at a high frequency in the building, as well as to the community. Now, that alone doesn't cover all of the things that we need to support our students and our staff in this process. We are looking at our attendance policy and guidelines and looking at how we can demonstrate some flexibility to students and staff and addressing that very specifically as they move through that quarantining process. Certainly employees with a higher risk, they have a very specific approach. We're going to work with them to make sure that we're reducing contact. Large gatherings, again, same boat. We're reducing those opportunities to move everything we can virtual. And again, if it's certainly under the 250 or the 25 gatherings, you know, it's not even in question, but we're moving those things like we do with our board meetings to make sure they're in a virtual setting. Again, continue to keep a relationship with our local Department of Health. And a big important part for us that came up in the planning process, as well continues to be one of our guiding principles, is the equity. How are we making sure that we've got families that either have language barriers, financial barriers, social, emotional barriers, how we're continuing them to give them opportunities to be processed through these screening processes, and how we're communicating with their caregivers in that particular lens to make sure that we're working closely with those agencies. This is an important part because I know that Miranda, Ms. King, has been integral in that, and she will continue to be integral as she has continued all summer to keep those relationships alive, to keep us abreast of what's going on with those families. And certainly, we have students that have high level of needs that require additional specific plans that will be worked out on an individual basis as we move through their plans. Kind of moving into how we keep the professional development and communication plans in place. You can see that from this document, we're sharing it both in asynchronous and synchronous formats. Again, if our goal is to reduce the number of gatherings, like we're asking our teachers to do, then we're doing that as well at the office level. So what we can do to provide professional development with either a video series or Zoom meetings to provide professional development for staff in an asynchronous setting, we will, as well as both at a synchronous when necessary. And that might be protocols or modeled behaviors inside the building. Again, there's that consistent signage and messaging that we're talking about modeling. Another item that I did add to the plan, or we did add to the plan, is the education on reducing stigma. CDC has released very specific guidance on reducing stigma. We know that stigma can lead to labeling, stereotyping, discrimination, and other negative behaviors towards individuals. COVID does not have a name, doesn't have a race, doesn't have a color, and we want to make sure that we're educating students, staff, and our stakeholders of that to continue to reduce that stigma so it does not then impact the social emotional well-being of our students and our staff. We're also working closely to develop a social emotional wellness plan. Myself, Mrs. Hassenfuss, and Ms. King have established a kind of a goal-setting process for the social emotional well-being for both our staff and our students upon return, and that plan is being instituted underway, which will be a big part of that professional development as we work to navigate their needs as they return to work with students on site. And again, that underlying theme of communication, we keep it continual, we keep it consistent, and we keep the messaging in front. So that's a lot of the safety end. And as I said in the beginning, you'll be getting that updated draft this week to go back in and take a look at some of the items that we've shared with much more succinct language. And certainly thanks to the updates from the Thursday, we have more changes to that plan, which, as Dr. Williams mentioned, was the catalyst that we saw in the change to our instructional modes. And the current recommendation is a K-12 hybrid model under green and yellow. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, this plan is contingent upon the color phases set forth by the governor at the current stage. And then lastly is the red phase where everybody would be returned back to a remote learning. But I do want to dive into those with a little bit more specificity so we have an understanding of what that means as we start to have conversations moving into the next part of tonight's agenda. So when we're looking at the model itself, okay, for a hybrid model, what we're saying is that families have options. If we go back to that guiding principle, we wanted to provide families and students educational opportunities that meet either their health and safety needs as a family or their educational needs as a family. So under the green and yellow phases, which is identical, which is a K-12 hybrid model, students, families have two choices. A hybrid model, which is partially in school, partially remote, or a 100% online version. That is something that we're going to offer as a school system. I'm going to get into that in a few moments. Under the red phase, when and if the state pulls everybody back, we have a forward learning, and I'm saying it's a 2.0. It is vastly different than what we experienced in the spring of last year. I'm going to get into more detail about that, as well as a 100% hybrid, 100% online model. So let's unpack that a little bit more closely. So let's take a look at what a hybrid model looks like and answer a couple questions about why the development is designed as such. So a hybrid learning model is in our definition, is going to be a split A-B schedule with 2 days of on-campus learning and 3 days of off-campus virtual learning. And the net result of that is a 50% reduction in total population on campus at any one time, which again allows us to meet those needs of the safety plan, but also meet our ideal opportunity to provide online in-person learning to students. One of the questions that continue to come up with regards to health and safety, as was part of our planning process, is why are we not doing A, let's use A for example, which is students A to K on Monday and Tuesday, and then students L to Z on Thursday and Friday. And there's a couple reasons. Number one, I want to make sure that we're very clear that it has nothing to do with a deep clean. That concept isn't a word we've been using. Our facilities and our Department of Facilities with Mr. Gerling and his crew are doing thorough and in-depth cleaning every day. So it's not that we need a day in the week to make a break to have a thorough or deep cleaning. We need to be cleaning as per the safety plan every day, multiple times a day on multiple surfaces. There isn't a need to have everybody out of the building to have a deep clean. We need a deep clean every single day for the protection of our students, just like we're cleaning the school bus every single time someone's on it. So that eliminates the conversation about why a midweek break is for deep cleaning. It's not for deep cleaning. The reason why we're proposing a hybrid model of A on Monday and B on Tuesday is more of its design for instruction. So when a teacher begins to prepare lesson activities, they have the ability to design instruction for Monday that can then be picked up and carried on for Tuesday, which can then create an asynchronous opportunity on Wednesday that allows students to rejoin together as a full class if needed or if necessary, then allows the same thing to happen for the next 2 days. So as a teaching, planning, and communication piece, it meets the learner as well as the teaching and planning. That's one reason. The second reason, it also allows us to have a day where we can get together as a community of learners, our staff, to engage in things such as IEP meetings, 504 meetings, other student-based meetings, review of data, lesson collaboration, assessment review. That part is still important for us. So staff is on site on Wednesday and they're engaging in those meetings. It also allows us to extend opportunities for students that might be on site all day. For example, our artistic students are going to have an opportunity to be in school every day to keep their consistency in place with their IEP. It allows us to do that in a place to keep the learning moving in a successful opportunity to collaborate then at that midday and midweek opportunity. So the proposal that we have before you this evening is students A to K would be traveling on that first run Monday and returning back on Thursday. Students with L to Z will be traveling on Tuesday and Friday. The other days would be remote. Of course, we're certainly going to pay very specific attention to families that might have multiple last names or require something very specific where one family member may have a different last name than another. We would certainly make sure that we're aligning family groups together in that process as they move through that hybrid model. So that's the notion of why we established the current structure. It's designed for a learning sequence that's best for students. It's designed for a learning sequence that's best for planning, for instruction for teachers, as well as an opportunity to engage in both synchronous and asynchronous opportunities for the students as they move through. Okay, that's our hybrid opportunity. As I mentioned, there is also an opportunity for our families to engage in 100% online option. And this is exciting. I do have to say, and Dr. Williams and I have been having this conversation, developing a cyber program has been part of the comprehensive planning process and was on our long-range plan to begin to develop. And sometimes out of a bad situation, we have an opportunity to build and design something that's best for students. And that's where this opportunity is coming from. And it's an opportunity that we're excited and already have started. And it is what we're calling our Trojan Online Pathways, or TOP for short, because again, it's going to be the top of the game. But it is newly developed. It is 100% cyber option for families. As you can see, we're in the process. We've established our online platform and moving through. It is different than forward learning. It is not forward learning. Forward learning is our plan when the state pulls everybody back and we have to go to remote. To start, it is cyber, where students have an opportunity to engage in flexible learning to meet their needs based on a family decision under the current guidance from the pandemic. Long-range plan is this is an opportunity where our Trojan Online Pathways becomes very fluid, and we see in engaging of students in and out of classes, both in a cyber environment as well as a brick and mortar. But to start, this is a 100% online opportunity for families to choose. What makes it special is it involves our teachers. It's YSSD teachers, it's YSSD curriculum. They're creating it, they're teaching it, they're designing it, they're involved in it. It's a York Suburban School District diploma. We've worked with Woodson's. We're going to have food services available for these families that they're going to be able to come and pick up their meals like they were regularly on site. So that continues to move. To start, we are going to work on some basic enrollments for marking period. And again, that is an important part because I'll talk about a little bit later, but we do need a plan. So we need to get some ideas of how many students are going to be involved so we can decide how many students are not going to be in regular classrooms and then how many teachers we need to staff it. So to get started, we're going to be committing families to at least to engage in a one marking period commitment to at least get us started so we can start to make some decisions on how many members we need to staff it, how many members we need to engage in the teaching and planning end of those courses as they move through. More information is coming on that. That'll be shared, but I wanted to make sure that as a board, you heard that 100% online option is just that. It is our 100% cyber virtual online school for students. It is a Trojan Online Pathways. It gives them that flexibility that they need. It is part of our long-term comprehensive plan. It is an opportunity for us to expand this. And in the years to come, it will continue to grow and develop. And certainly I know, given the individuals that are already on this train working, it's exceeding the expectations that we set at the very beginning. So that's an exciting opportunity from there. So kind of in a nutshell, at this point, we provided families with two very distinct options in-house. They may choose to engage in our hybrid opportunity learning, which is a combination of both on-site learning and remote learning, or may choose our Trojan Online Pathways. And then, of course, there are students that choose not to attend York Suburban in their educational opportunities, but we're very confident in the two that we're offering to be robust, rigorous, and engaging, and work with great results for our students. Last item that I want to talk about with regards to learning modes is, of course, that red phase. If we would move into red phase, we're moving back into forward learning. Forward learning, not like we learned in the spring. In the spring was new for everybody. And I think back to that time when Dr. Williams talked about the story, what happened on that Friday the 13th. And next thing you know, everybody's doing their best to get us across that finish line. Every time I have a chance to thank the parents, the students, the teachers, the administrators about what they did last spring, I want to make sure I give that thanks again, because that's what happened last spring. But like good teachers and good students, we learned a lot. We learned from the experience. We learned from the surveys that we sent to students, staff, and parents. And that helped us pivot and respond to make upgrades in case we have to go to forward learning again. We're developing stronger schedules that more align to a brick and mortar. They're more predictable. They're more planned. The grading expectations are equal to brick and mortar. Attendance and participation is tracking and reported. So it's much more rigorous, it's much more specific, and it'll be communicated as such. We learned from that. We learned from that opportunity, and as good students and good teachers, we made changes to our programming to ensure that if we have to go to forward learning again in a red phase, we would respond to that. So forward learning is very different than the Trojan Online Pathways. It is our response if the district is forced to move into a red phase, which shuts down all facilities like it did in the spring of last year. Okay, so what's next? As I shared in the very beginning, we're going to provide you an updated draft and health and safety plan before the end of this week, by July 24th. It's going to reflect, as I share in this plan, the new items that were mentioned, highlighted a little bit with the double star. In particular, what guided that was the 6-foot social distancing, which was catalyst from the cafeteria. And of course, our intentional efforts to limit the number of individuals in classrooms. So that's coming at the end of the week. You'll then have that 2-week review time. Both community as well as the board will receive all those updates. Also coming this week is a descriptive and more visual portrayal of hybrid learning model, and again, the Trojan Online Pathways. I gave a very high-level description, so parents know that they have some choices to make a decision on at this point. Am I choosing a hybrid model where my children or my child is one day, my student, my learner is on-site some days and remote some days, or am I having a family decision to choose a 100% online, which is our Trojan Online Pathways? We're going to be providing this week a more detailed description of that. It's most likely going to be in a video session or an open session with some frequently asked questions, so parents can have some informed thinking, so that we can then send out a survey, again, at the end of this week, which will allow us to gather some information in next week, at this point, it's not a commitment survey. It's allowing parents to learn a little bit more about our options and then give us a little bit of feedback. Where are you currently with regards to our instructional mode? Are you thinking more 100% online? Are you thinking hybrid? Or are you choosing not to attend York Suburban? That allows us to begin planning at a staffing level and to begin planning at a structural level. Also, we're going to do a little more intentional about transportation. Are you currently, we asked this question early in the summer, we're going to ask it again. Are you considering bringing your child to school, or are you depending on the school bus transportation? Again, it allows us to refine and enhance that transportation plan we're making with Reliance to make sure that it's fitting to the most highest level our safety plan. We're also going to dig a little bit deeper in food services. Are you a family that's planning on having your son or your child or your learner pack, or are you planning on buying? Again, allowing us to be strategic in our planning with regard. Again, these are ideas, not etched in stone commitments. And then we're also going to ask another idea about our technology infrastructure in case we have to pivot back to a red phase with remote learning in forward learning. After that information is gathered, we can start to plan more accordingly. We'll prime this up for our August 3rd board meeting, and then we'll get into a little bit more detailed commitments for families. We'll provide a more detailed window into the Trojan Online pathways. So those families that are interested in it, we'll be able to have a greater, maybe online session where we can engage in a little bit more depth about what it looks like, a glimpse into at a higher level what it looked for my family and those decisions. And then we would start to take requests for commitments. And again, we'll come back to that one marking period commitment. We do have to keep that commitment in place as we can plan for those teachers and staff, as well as how we can plan for the instruction to end in that way. So that's the timeline. That's the information. Again, I'll be sharing that out at the end. I did include a lot of the reference tools that we've been using in the planning process as we move through this. It's a lot of information. I'm not sure if I can address some of your specific questions tonight or over time.
Scott, I've got a couple. It's like back to school. I've got two questions with multi-parts.
Fire away.
So the first is, what's the criteria we're going to use to determine back to normal, back to all in?
That's a great question. We've engaged in that conversation at the current stage because that particular plan is listed in the green and yellow phases. We've been going under the premise that it'll be released from the state, that we are safe to engage in a all return to school. Early in the planning process, there was this discussion that, there's going to be a kind of a new green phase. We haven't been given very specific directions to that. I don't know if Dr. Williams has an additional comment to that, but at this point, we don't have a very specific directive to say this is what's going to make a 100% return to all students back to school.
So, but given conditions, we could go back at the end of a marking period. This wouldn't be a year-long exercise if a miracle occurred.
Correct.
All right. Next is, suppose you've got this wonderful online learnings program. What's the number of high school kids that would have to sign up for online learning to make it feasible to go all in right now? So if 30% of the high school kids all decide to do online learning, do we have enough space to not do the A/B model in, say, high school?
I'm not sure if I understand that question.
Right now, one of the things is distancing, right? That's why we're doing this A/B model.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose we only had 2/3 of the active students instead of 100%, or suppose only half of the students were there. Would the A/B model still be necessary?
That's a good question. I think under the current design, it would be, because I'm not sure if the response is if we said, 30% or 2/3 of the students, or let's say 60% have engaged in online learning. If we would say, okay, we're going to open up, would those students then say, well, we want to come back? And that would basically pivot us right back to where we started. So the way we're building it, it's not contingent on if we have more students, I'll say, choose the option of 100% Trojan Online pathways, that it's going to free us up to say the high school is ready to have 100% of students online. 100% of students return, because it inevitably could could kind of work in the opposite direction. And all of a sudden, all the students who have that choice to say, I want it online, decide they want to return.
Okay, two more and I'll shut up and let everybody else talk. One of them is, I'm really sort of taken with the concept of your TOPS program. I think that's pretty slick. I think long-term, that'll be a nice addition. So the question is, if it's that wonderful and we went to red, why would we go to forward learning? Why wouldn't we stay with TOPS?
That's a great question. And a lot of that is time and development. Really what we're doing now, I think our hope would be in the long term, if this life that we live now continues the way that we envision our Trojan Online pathways to be developed, to be a combination of meeting the needs of a family that 100% flexibility is their reason for choosing a cyber program, that we can satisfy that. And then we can also satisfy that need of individuals that want a more structured forward learning where you have a daily schedule of synchronous times. That's the kind of hurdle, how we want to do both. And navigating between who's going to staff what and how many students are enrolled at one time has kind of been the juggle. But to your point, yes, I think in long term, we'd love to be able to say, this is where we can ebb and flow between two programs. And really, I'll say it, and between a brick and mortar program as well.
Okay, and last question, and I think Carly asked this last week. Suppose you have a staff member or a student who basically says, I'm not wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
What's the option?
That's a great question. So currently under the governor's orders, the secretary's order, it is required as soon as you leave your home. There are certain exceptions to that. Again, if they have a healthcare position or, something that may, preclude them from being able to wear a mask. One of the conversations that Dr. Williams and I engaged in today would be, depending on the student, they have an option to go to our Trojan Online pathways, and we would communicate that with the student and the parent in that. But if they're choosing to not wear a mask, it's defying the order of the secretary, which means the only way to do that is because you've got a health condition. So we would engage in a 504 planning process and engage in a medical process to engage them with wearing a mask. And why the exception is that they wouldn't be wearing a mask under our current guidance from the Department of Health from Secretary Levine.
So it's doctor's note driven though. It's not a.
No, not
It's
really.
504 plan driven.
504 plan driven, because it can't necessarily by default say I need a doctor's note. But if you're saying that you're not wearing a mask, then we need to accommodate that medically inside the school system. So we would need to engage in a deeper conversation of how we can satisfy your medical needs. And a 504 would be the next conversation we'd want to engage in and rule out whether or not it was a medical need to be addressed here in the school system.
Okay, thanks. Now I'll shut up. Let somebody else talk.
Dr. Krauser, and thanks for all your hard work here. So I see we got about $500,000 of CARES grant money. All of these measures that we've put in place, and maybe this is a Kathy question, what is the estimated cost of pulling this together? And then what do you think the ongoing cost is going to be if we have to go through this for an entire year?
That's a great question, and certainly one we've engaged in quite a bit. I will let Mr. Chuli answer that question. I can say from just the CARES end, and I threw that 530 up there because it did go quick when we talk about the planning and preparation to get an online program up, as well as ensuring the safety features. But I'm going to let Mr. Chuli answer that with a little more specificity.
Okay.
So right now what we're doing is gathering that information for you. So we absolutely know that there is going to be expenditures that we didn't plan for the online version of our education. So a rough estimate, we estimated about $450,000 for the entire year.
450,000 on top of the grant, or 450 inclusive?
This is outside of the grant. The grant money is already spent between technology, equipment, supplies for custodial services, some PD for staff, and things like that. So that money is already accounted for. So the items that I'm speaking of now are outside of the grant money and above what we've budgeted.
Okay. and thank you. So let's say we have situations in the elementary school where the kids aren't maintaining their 6 foot of social distance, which in all likelihood, the younger the kids, it's going to happen. And let's say we've got a teacher that tests positive for COVID, or you have a parent that sends a kid in that has COVID, and it spreads amongst the class. I get the quarantine angle, but has the state provided any guidance whatsoever on what type of indemnification would be available for the school district in the event that, you know, something was unknowingly followed, or I'm sorry, something wasn't followed, or we weren't using our best efforts to apply our process?
At this point, they haven't, and I think that's their direction for the individual relationship with the Department of Health. Under each case is addressed through the Department of Health and the communication with them. I have not seen any specific guidance on items specific to that. I don't know if Dr. Williams may have seen something different.
No, I have not, but if I wouldn't mind asking Ms. Say to comment.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the idea of indemnification from student athletes to people entering school district property. And the reality of an indemnification is that it's basically asking someone to remove all liability from you in exchange for something else. And that's not really the situation we find ourselves in, because public school students have to attend school and our employees essentially need to attend their jobs. So I like to consider this analysis of liability and risk in terms of the personal responsibility that every person has when they show up for school and work. And I evaluate the district's risk by its reasonable response to the guidance and requirements that are set forth by the authorities. So just like we would consider a negligence action based upon the actions of the reasonable man, we consider what would someone say about the actions of the school district? Did they act reasonably, or did they act grossly negligently to ignore the advice that was presented? Did they not have a plan? Were they not attempting in good faith to implement that plan? And so, we're only as compliant as the guidance that we get. So as more of it comes out, as Dr. Krauser stated, we're getting more and more compliant. We're getting more and more refined. But right now, there's not a lot of detail out about what things like contact tracing and school closures actually look like. And I believe that's quite intentional. I think the state does not know what it looks like to close buildings because students are sick, because it's guaranteed we're going to have students are sick. We have student athletes that are already presenting with COVID. There's no scenario where school can remain open if we have to close a school building because one child is sick. So I think the state is trying to figure out what that looks like. The guidance is suggestive right now that things like building closures are not anticipated as a result of a few outbreaks, but it might be something that comes down the bend. So there's a definite balance of reasonable responsibilities. And I think that's the greatest protection for the school district, balancing the personal responsibility and our adherence to the requirements.
Thank you.
Questions for you. This is Ellen, one or two. Your TOPS program, I think that's really great thinking, and I appreciate the time and energy that has gone into developing that program. What is that cost going to be? Obviously, I'm hoping that you're going to tell me it's not as expensive as when we send children off to attend regular cyber schools, which is $15,000 or something like that for regular ed. What's the cost going to be to the district for each student who decides they're going to do this? Go to TOPS. I'm assuming that they will be home, but they will need, computers and things like that.
Correct. Well, that's a great question. Number one, I can assure you it's not going to cost $15,000, which is the answer I know you were hoping for. It's twofold. We did need to spend, and we do need to spend some dollars in preparation to build. We very early in the process, when we think about a traditional cyber program, they are outsourcing their curriculum. You often hear things such as Edgenuity or Odysseyware. Many of you may have engaged in that or been, people who engaged in it and seen students who engaged in it. We have seen that curriculum and collectively agreed that it is not the curriculum that we want to be using with our students or have our teachers manipulate to meet our students' needs. Therefore, we made the distinct decision to use our curriculum with our students. So the dollars up front is really the movement of taking what is traditional curriculum inside of a brick or mortar facility and then moving that into a virtual environment. Which does take time. And that time has started this summer. So we do need to pay teachers to come and spend the time taking that curriculum and moving it out. That's one of the reasons why it's that juggle to find out how many students we're going to enroll, because once we figure that out, now we need to match that up with, there were some individual teachers who, and thank them all, who said, I want to help with this process. I love curriculum. I'm engaged. I want to provide this opportunity. But I'm not necessarily a person who wants to choose to teach in a 100% online environment. We have the opposite. We have some teachers that choose to want to teach in that environment, but might not want to write the curriculum for it. So that's that kind of trade-off as we're to navigate those two realms. So at this point, what we're paying for at the current stage is the curriculum development. And I say that word loosely because it's not really curriculum development. It's more like curriculum movement and enhancement, where you have to change an assessment that may have been passed out on a paper pencil and move that as an assessment into something different. It's not necessarily a complete rewrite of the assessment, but it is a change in that assessment.
Okay,
So
I get that.
there is cost involved in that. With regards to the technology, thanks to your efforts in the past, Suburban has been able to deploy a one-to-one, and we did this through Forward Learning. And as Mr. Chuli mentioned, some of our grant money, we have an available resource for every student, K to 12, in a one-to-one setting. So already that's a part of our infrastructure. So that's a seamless transition as well. So in a nutshell, the price, I'll say in the end, doesn't come anywhere close to those dollars. As the initial program begins and the development of those courses takes place, it takes a little bit more money in the front end, but once the curriculum is moved into our Schoology platform, the fine-toothing, the shaping, and I kind of use this analogy with the teachers that we've got some clay, we're making a pot, it's going to take some shaping and molding repeatedly where we might have to add some water and reshape it, but inevitably we're creating what we have already in place to make it better.
Give me a rough estimate. Come on.
So currently, we're probably going to get close to, and I think Mr. Chuli has that exact number, but I think we're, in and over around that 150 range, just in the teacher preparation time, to get things up and running.
And that's for one semester.
Correct.
100 and how much is that per student or per teacher? I'm sorry. How much are you charging each student?
There's
How
no
much is it going to cost? I get that.
There's no charge for students. Yeah. These are our students. We're giving them another option to choose that.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But you're saying me it's $150 a semester? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's $150,000 worth of staff time to begin to transition into a cyber curriculum.
Okay.
Is
So
that
you're
number
saying
in the
the-
439?
That number is not included in the grant money.
Okay, so we're up to 650 then, or 600,000?
Yeah, it was 450 and another 150, right?
No,
Right. Yeah.
No. The 450, the
Included.
450,000 is for the entire school year.
But does that include the 150,000 that Dr. Krauser's talking about?
He's estimating 150,000. I got 100,000. You give it a couple of $1,000s in between, but per semester between 100,000 and 150,000 for teacher prep time to move the curriculum to online version.
But that's on top of the incremental $450,000 that we talked about. So now we're, for this new program that's as a result of this COVID-19, now we're up to spending an incremental, at least for the first semester, $600,000 on top of the grant money. Is that the way
No,
I'm
it's
hearing it?
total. My $450,000 estimate is total for the entire school year.
not just Trojan Online Pathways. That's
Okay, but
training materials, signage, everything.
Okay.
I get that you have developmental costs and everything, but when we send a kid off for the year to whatever cyber school and it costs us $15,000, what do you project? Is it going to be $3,000, $4,000 per student for the year, $5,000 for the year?
We don't charge the students. There are students who are choosing our option.
But it's going to cost us something, or are you
No.
figuring we've already paying these
No.
teachers, so
No.
it's not going to cost?
No.
Okay, all right,
The
okay. got
developmental
that.
cost is an investment up front. And
Okay.
the developmental costs it's an investment because this is something that can be used year after year after year.
Okay,
and potentially be enticing to draw back cyber charter students.
Right.
So
Okay.
it'll pay for itself. It's hard to say
Okay.
how 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but it's an
Okay.
investment in future and allows us to provide an online option that students can, maybe down the road, we have students taking 4 of their courses brick and mortar and 1 or 2 of their courses through TOP, or
Okay.
some variation of it. It
Okay.
can also help with enrollment, not enrollment. It can also help with numbers of
Increase-
students in a building too.
Okay. Dr. Krauser, one, you keep referring, things will be referred to the Department of Health for approval and guidance. We don't have a county Department of Health. We're going to have to use the Pennsylvania Department of Health?
No,
Or-
no, we're gonna be using, when there's an absence of a Department of Health in the county, I think the state has determined that the mental health organization within the county will take the lead on the issue. So for us, that's York County Human Services Division, if I'm not mistaken. And
That's my understanding as well. Yeah.
So they're going to be ramped up enough to help the 15 districts then? Is that the idea? Okay. Just curious as to, how that was going to,
Yeah.
and
Great
just one,
question.
technical thing. You're talking about bus runs and cleaning of the buses. Most of our buses typically run 2 runs, the secondary and then the elementary primary students. There's no cleaning going to be done between those runs, is there, or is there?
Currently, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Chuli. I think she can chime in. Currently, we're engaged in that conversation with Alliance right now, how we can meet the needs of that within both the contract that we have with them and what that services are going to look like.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Okay.
that will, as of right now, it will be an additional cost.
You had mentioned that. You gave us some other figure, like $93,000 or something for cleaning, but I didn't know if that included the between the runs or if that's going to be even more cost
That estimate is for 1 cleaning per bus per day.
per day. Okay, so we have to look at whether we do the other or not do the other, or, whether we do the between the runs or not, correct?
We have a meeting scheduled with Reliance tomorrow to discuss specifics.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Krauser. Lots of work to all of those of you who worked on this.
Thank you.
We'll take more comment.
Sure, I have a few questions. And I'm sorry I dropped off because of a bad connection if these questions were asked. One was, I heard you, Dr. Krauser, say that there's going to be a commitment that if you do the TOPS, you're in it for a marking period. Have you thought about the other end? If a student begins hybrid and then 2 weeks into the experience, the family or the student believes that for safety reasons, it's not working out the way they thought, will they be able to switch in at that point?
Sure. That's a great question, sir. Well, first of all, the reason why we're looking for the commitment now, students that want to, let's say a student signs up for TOP program, for TOP, wants to be in the Trojan Online Pathways, and realizes that they feel that they're ready to return to hybrid, that's an easy return back. It's the reverse that I think you're asking for is the question. And the hurdle there becomes how we can manage the enrollment of the section. So that's why we're asking for that 1 month enrollment commitment. So what we're going to be looking for families to do is make their commitments to start the school year and move through at least a marking period. Individual families that may run into that, we are going to try to assess them at an individual basis. For example, there may be, let's say, a 3rd grade student who under certain circumstances realize the hybrid model is not working for them and would like to enroll in TOP. We can assess then much more specifically at that time, how many students are currently enrolled in 3rd grade, how many students are working with our current 3rd grade TOP teacher, and can they take another student onto that roster, or are we at a bubble point where we have too many students and we can't take it? So what my answer to that is, we're going to try to assess every one of those at an individual level, but we're looking for as much as a commitment as we can in the beginning so we can appropriately staff both ends. We're going to need to staff a Trojan Online Pathways, and we're going to need to staff a classroom too, to those students. And without knowing the numbers, it makes it extremely difficult. That's why that commitment, hope is established in the very beginning.
Right. And if there's a student or some students who are quarantined for 14 days, you know, and they're in the hybrid, has it been thought through yet how, you know, how they're going to be able to keep up in their education?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a separate option. What we're currently preparing for is an opportunity for students to stream into, because really this issue would only become extremely relevant to a family that's involved in the hybrid option. And what we're looking for is a way to stream into the classroom so the student at home can be a part of the 2 days of on-site learning.
Right.
And we're working with current policy of what we can do to make some adjustments to have classes being streamed back to that home for quarantine, sick students that are only for a small period of time. It's not for a full market period, and we can satisfy their needs during that quarantine period.
But that's an additional concept of what hybrid can mean then. Within a class, there could be a hybrid experience.
Correct.
Right. And so one other question then, and that has to do with a staffing question, in that being the health crisis that it is, I imagine that this could create quite significant expectations and responsibilities on nurses. So does York Suburban have the resources allocated currently to enable the nurses to be able to fulfill what could be an incredibly weighty responsibility? So I'm really focused on the ability of York Suburban to carry out on the health side of it. Is there a hiring plan, or how is the district thinking about the nursing situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it certainly gives us an opportunity to give a huge shout out to the nurses. And I will say that they have been an integral part of communication through the beginning. And I'll give you a little sidebar example just to demonstrate their level of commitment. When we brought in staff to begin our top work, we had nurses volunteer their time to come in and engage in a screening process with the teachers as they are arriving, to help educate them on the screening process, to help model the screening process, and engage in what it's going to look like when the school year begins. So that's just an example to your point about their level of commitment and where they are. Currently, as it stands, we've been engaging in the conversations about what that's going to look like with our current nursing staff. Right now, we feel comfortable that the current nursing staff and our health room assistants can cover that, because a lot of that process, we hope, is engaged in the responsibilities that parents and families are required to do screening at home as well. So the increased level of that would be what kind of screening is being accomplished at home and what that does with the results of students that have come to school. So at this point, we feel comfortable with the current numbers. That's one of those things in the air. Not sure what we're going to see unfold in the next few weeks. But at the current time, there isn't a hiring plan specifically tied to our nursing staff.
Okay.
And we should keep in mind as well, too, that in any given building, there's going to be actually less than half the students that are normally in that building at any one time, because we're going to have some segment of the population that's going to choose top, and then whatever's left, we're going to have half of whatever's left in the building at one time. So that'll help the numbers immensely, because in some buildings we'll have 125, 130 kids at any one time, at an elementary building perhaps, or some number like that.
Joel, did I hear you ask a question? Or?
I'd like to ask a couple.
Sure.
One, to kind of follow up on the term screening. We're talking about having parents hold the responsibility for screening their kids literally every day. Does that form come with the child? Is that something you'll talk about in the detailed plan? I don't necessarily have to have the answer tonight, but just thinking about the logistics of managing the screening gives me a headache. And it's for two things. One is just the paper handling piece of it. And the second is what is our response if the child's parent either misrepresents or a child presents symptoms after we've allowed the child into the school.
Right.
So you don't need to answer that now, but I'm just asking, is that the sort of detail that you'll put into this document that we'll be looking at between now and the 3rd, relative to screening?
Sure. We specifically didn't say the answer to that. Kind of the document doesn't have the response to a particular incident where a family may have underscored on the screening, but the question you have is an interesting one, because just as even of today, we're already seeing innovative designers, as you would think, that now they are designing screening apps.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah, and how either schools or families can engage in that. But to your questions in specifics, that's what we're working on right now. What is the communication? With a staff end, we do have a collection protocol process that we put in place with the first plan, which is a collaborative document that allows us to track that at a private level with the nurse. The other part of that is how we engage in that with HIPAA regulations and what we can have coming and going. But that's a piece that we're diving into a deeper level.
Do I understand that there's a second screening process for the athletes, as an example? Do they screen in the morning and also before they start a practice? I think I read in the extracurricular plan that there's a screening process that takes place there as well.
Correct. Athletics has their own screening process prior to any participation activity.
All right, and then relative to infections, does the CDC trump the DOH? And the reason I'm asking that is because CDC has a very strict definition of close contact. And I see you smiling, Scott. And then that leads to another question, which is whether we have to have some kind of a de facto agreement that there's close contact that takes place in a particular setting. Otherwise, it becomes subjective and it requires something like a continuous assessment of distance and time. You know, it sounds ridiculous, but it's almost as if the kids have to carry yardsticks and stopwatches to determine if they're quote unquote in close contact. Of course, that leads to another as the dominoes start to fall. If we decide, for example, that because we really can't do this real-time monitoring of proximity of students and teachers, that as an example, in a 4th grade class where there are 20 kids present with a teacher, if one of those kids is infected, are they quote unquote all in close contact, and are they all subject to the CDC quarantine?
Yeah.
Don't need to answer it now, but that's the kind of thing that really keeps me awake, because I can see this cascading through something even more complicated, an 8th grade class where there aren't the same 20 kids all day long, or a football game where there are possibly 100 kids that are in close contact.
I can answer it sort of briefly, Joel, just to say that the CDC doesn't have binding guidance for us, but they are strongly influential on our own Department of Health. In the guidance that PDE and DOH have eked out relative to contact tracing, it's not at the extraordinarily level of close contact as described by CDC, but that's not to say that as things get more specific and we get greater guidance, we might not get closer to that. But what I'm reading between the lines of the current PDE and DOH guidance relative to schools is the recognition that if that same definition of within 10 feet or within 6 feet for longer than 10 minutes, if that's going to try to apply in schools, that they recognize that's going to mean that essentially dozens of kids are out every day and buildings are closed all the time, and they realize that's not a feasible option. That's why it's pretty evident sometime in the next few weeks, we may hear that we don't have an option. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see what our numbers look like, and we'll see how heavily influenced the CDC is on our own Department of Health and what our numbers do. But right now, they're not committing us to the type of detailed contact tracing that CDC lays out in rigid black and white, at least from what I see. And if Dr. Krauser, you disagree, or Dr. Williams, just weigh in.
That was my most recent read this morning, to the same point, and to Ms. Say's point as well. We've seen this literally incremental change in a little bit more stringent approach, and I would anticipate at some point the rubber's going to meet the road, and they're either going to have to make a definitive decision and or provide, to your point, and that's why I was smiling, Joe, because I would agree when I started to read that and we look at those definitions, there tends to be this overlap, and then what becomes the reality in a school system that can actually be accomplished, and then how do you either trace that, communicate that, and act on that?
Well, I may have been looking at the wrong guidelines, but I started on a DOH page that had a link to a CDC page, and it's by reference, which, I mean, structurally, I think that's the right way to do it, so that there's one definition that we can all agree on, and we're not trying to redefine and requalify and reinterpret every time somebody uses a term. This is supposed to be a defined term, not something that the man on the street or the woman on the street interprets in the moment. and we have an obligation because we have hundreds of kids, people in the same building at the same time. So will we have our definition of close contact, or are we going to just let it roll? In other words, we won't worry about it until somebody presents with an infection.
We did not define it in the plan. I guess, are you asking, should we choose to choose one of those defining definitions and implement that into the plan?
Well, I'm not saying that we define it in exact terms. I'm saying that we will have a de facto assumption of close contact if people are in the following environment. They're in the same classroom for 6 hours. That's de facto close contact.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying. That's a suggestion. I'm not saying that's what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different approach than saying everybody's going to carry a yardstick and a stopwatch.
Right.
Just remember, relative to close contact, I believe there will be additional guidance weighing in whether the individuals are masked. Up until now, the guidance I've had to give relative to the DOH order that addresses employees specifically, a good bit of our guidance when we get a positive COVID test is looking at the 2 individuals who were interacting. Now, that was easier over the summer when there was a small group. But if you have a building and grounds guy who's talking to a contractor, the contractor has COVID, and B&G guy is not sure how long he was with the contractor, but if he had a mask, that can be really important relative to that close contact and whether he was likely to have been exposed to the virus, because again, that mask makes a difference. If the contractor was also masked, that also goes into the analysis. But I don't think we know that answer yet relative to, we have reliance on CDC guidance. We have the recognition that they don't want to close entire classrooms or entire buildings just because students pass in the hallway. But I don't think we have clear guidance now. And I think what you're saying is you want a clear rule. And I would agree, we're going to have some sort of clear rule, which ultimately might result in a lot less kids in school.
Well, it could be a positive rule or a negative rule. It says if we meet the following conditions, everybody's wearing a mask, there are no more than the prescribed number of people in the space, then that by definition is not close contact.
Right. And my hunch is when we look at the most recent updates, where now they're returning us back to communication to the PA Department of Health with the county agencies to have those conversations on the risk assessment is for that reason.
Okay.
To punt it a little bit down the street, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. This is Steve Sullivan. I might as well just follow on to Joel's latter point. Unless I missed it, contact with a confirmed or probable case is not even on the screener at this point. It's a symptom screener. It's not a contact trace screener, and we know that there's significant asymptomatic transmission, and in fact, something like fewer than 50% of cases of folks who even become symptomatic present with a fever in the first place. So I would tend to think that contact with a confirmed or probable case is a risk factor that we ought to be screening for. And I know it's on the athletic form, but it didn't appear to be on the form that we saw tonight. And I know that various things were excerpted, so if I missed it, I apologize. But I saw symptom groups in A and B. I didn't see confirmed or probable case.
I'll double check that. I know that's in the plan, but the new screening tool that we just got on Thursday, as I pulled that from, it didn't list there, but I'll double check that because you're correct. I know we have had that conversation, and it is part of our screening process.
I think your policy relevant close contact cases are going to be an infected person in the home, which should definitely be over that line in terms of triggering close contact. If a child's parent is a confirmed or probable case, then I would think that child would need to be handled by whatever path that is, indicated by that. And the other would be students in a classroom together with somebody who tests positive. As a parent of a couple of high-risk kids, I would want to know that one of my children's classmates had tested positive. You don't have to tell me who the kid is, but I would want to know. And I think that a lot of parents would react very negatively to the firing solution for this ending up being erring on the side of not telling people because we don't want to shut down a classroom. I think folks will want to be notified. Following up on something that Steve Scalette said, it's fairly easy to imagine a situation where if you have the disease working its way through a family with a 14-day to 21-day course of the disease plus a 2-week quarantine potentially for people who are having close contact with confirmed or probable cases, that you could have a student who's out for 5 or 6 weeks on quarantine just because the people they're around are sick, as a parent gets it or a sibling gets it or something like that. So I would hope that there would be some sort of allowances. I think you seem to indicate that for taking the classes remotely while remaining in the hybrid option rather than the top option.
Correct.
I'm glad that you guys are thinking about that. I had a number of parents ask me what determines what is feasible or practical with respect to the use of that language in the plan, because there are multiple references to, this is practical, this is feasible. Who determines it? Is the classroom teacher? Is it the building administration? I'm not saying you have to have an answer now, but I think folks are interested in knowing, at what level those sorts of decisions are going to be made. I guess the only other question, and this seems to be in flux, I think is the answer, but as soon as it could be made available to the board and to the public, the documents that indicate whatever health administration entity will be making the decisions about what to do in the event of a confirmed or probable case. As you know, in the conversations that we had about looking at some of what our neighbor districts were doing, my concern is that folks were indicating they were going to throw the ball downfield to some entity that hadn't indicated that it was in the end zone waiting to catch the ball. And what that effectively results in is no mechanism, no solution, no decision being made about what happens. Oh, well, we said they'd make the decision when they never indicated they would make a decision, referring to Department of Health or whoever else. So I suppose it's fine to incorporate by reference what other people we're going to collaborate with on decisions. I just want to make sure that they have in fact said, we will be making decisions about buildings closing or classrooms closing or who gets quarantined or who doesn't get quarantined, so that we don't hand it off to somebody who says, well, we never said we would make that decision.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. To follow up on the question, I guess John brought it up initially, regarding students who, for whatever reason, are not wearing a mask. You said the 504 plan. Under that case scenario, would those students be separated from a classroom? I mean, is it conceivable that my 4th grader would be in a classroom with a student who is not wearing a mask?
I think from that analysis is similar to the way we see it in the public sector, that there are individuals that follow the the order by the Secretary of Health, who are in the community unmasked because of a current medical condition. So depending on what's worked out through that 504 process, how is their educational process being impacted by a medical condition, and what we need to accommodate that within the school system. So could a 4th grader be in a classroom where someone has a medical condition where they can't wear a mask? That could be a possibility, yes.
Okay, all right.
And I'll even say it could very well be that there may be staff members who have a medical condition that preclude them from wearing a mask.
Yeah, in my mind, that would be really problematic. I mean, I understand, medical conditions, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems associated with this. That doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but that for me would be problematic to have really both. I mean, I think there's all kinds of science behind the concept that if we would all wear the mask, we would be ahead of the game. You know, it's a step in the right direction at any rate. So again, that's just a little bit of an issue in my mind.
Administrator, just on that issue, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here with legal advice in a public session, but when you do an analysis under the ADA or Section 504 relative to students or staff, there is a provision that provides for a direct threat analysis. And the EEOC has currently declared COVID-19 a direct threat that can be influential in determining the type and manner of accommodations that an employee may be permitted to have and how a district can treat that in the school environment. We don't have an explicit ruling on how that applies to students, but it just goes to show that this is going to be an individualized analysis depending on each circumstance. But there's not just an official black and white rule. It is not just you get a medical diagnosis, you don't have to wear a mask and you can attend school. It's not a free-for-all that, you know, everybody is exposed, because a lot of people get doctor's notes and say this is what they're going to do. It's going to be an individualized determination. It's not going to be ruled by doctors. It's going to be done by 504 teams and IEP teams and administrators in buildings. And I think that's what should be made very, very clear. This is not just a rubber stamping process.
Good, and thank you for that. And I mean, I'm certainly sympathetic to that, and you know, I thank you for that. Secondary situation. Classes change, go from first period to second period. A new group of students comes into Mrs. Jones's English class. What happens to those desks that first period kids just left behind, and now second period kids have to come and sit in?
Yes, that's what we asked.
That's a great question. So first and foremost, when working with the schedule, as often as possible, we're not moving those students. So we'll say secondary English, you know, Dr. Ellis, and you know, kudos to him. He's probably redone that schedule I don't know how many times. As often as he can to move the teacher is who he's going to move. If it reduces 7 students in that change or what, you know, so there's the very strategic intent to understand which students are moving at what time. Now, as you mentioned at the high school, that happens very less likely. So let's use your example that second period rings, they move those students out. Yes, we're working with Mr. Gerling and his crew to, number one, ensure that high touch point areas are cleaned and sanitized in that particular area. Then what happens with the cleaning kit inside that building, with the wiping down and re-cleaning of that process inside that classroom to the best of the ability in that transition, or as many times as we can reduce those transmissions in the class to allow more time for high touch areas to be cleaned during student movement would be the goal of that transition time.
My concern was, is that going to be left up to the classroom teacher, and what kind of consistency could therefore be expected? I mean, I just, it's a lot of it's going to fall on, you know, shoulders, and that was just a question that I needed to understand a little bit. Mm-hmm. And while we're talking about responsibilities on the staff, I mean, you guys are in effect going to be frontline workers now. You know, you're going to have administrators, you know, office staff, teachers coming, and that's the way it's going to be. Are we as a district going to provide our employees with any kind of protective equipment? Are we going to have masks for them? Are they going to be a quality mask? Are we leaving up to individuals to wear a bandana or an N95, depending on what they have access to?
Well, currently we do have masks for all staff. And in the same breath, given the governor's order most recently, all staff members, you know, inevitably probably have their own PPE as well. And varying on who you are, each one of you probably has a variety of different masks. We're certainly going to have PPE available on site on days that it's forgotten in a car or it's missed. But yes, we are working on base line materials for staff. So at the very least, we are providing a mask for staff, and we're investigating, even at the elementary level, potential shields that might be critical to that particular teacher who's teaching, you know, the long O or whatever that might be that particular day, to ensure that we're best meeting the educational environment as well.
Right, good. And my last question is, what kind of timeline are you looking at in terms of families making their decision to do TOPS or not?
Correct. The way we currently have the timeline is at this week, we're going to produce more information for families to get a closer look at what TOP will offer, as well as what hybrid will offer. And the reason I say that is because I think conceptually people understand what a hybrid model is, but we also want to show that a little bit more closely, hearing it, but sometimes we need to see what is a half a classroom of students going to look like, and those kinds of things. So they'll get that information this week, as well as a survey to get general ideas. Just give us your intentions. You know, where are you thinking? We're looking then to get a commitment from them that first week of August, to get a little bit more specific about, because we inevitably need to plan. We need to get teachers either pulled out of the regular classrooms and assigned to teach online, and or vice versa. So we're looking for a commitment that first week of August, which would then give us a week to redo the schedules and prepare teachers for the education to bring our students back on the Monday, or excuse me, the Wednesday.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks to the hard work that you and everybody has put into this. It's a mammoth task, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, since you're doing all this training and putting up all this signage, why don't you make the kids clean their desk when they finish and walk out?
Well, I think there'll probably be students that are willing to do that on their own, just because their own knowledge of keeping their own environment clean and safe.
Yeah. Other questions?
I have one, Scott, and a number of the communications that I received, there was concern about consistency, particularly at the high school level, dealing with the grading system this year and choosing of courses and helping the kids get ready for college applications and things like that. Is that one of those topics that might be covered in one of those meetings that you're planning to have in some way or other, or whatever, with parents or something, or information you're going to send out specifically to parents?
Correct. There will be no disruption into the opportunities that students can take. You know, and we'll provide more detail into that. For example, if I'm choosing TOP as an opportunity and pathway for my family, we'll get into the specifics about what course offerings and options are available, and what that looks like for credits. But all of those opportunities will be available for students.
I am assuming that we still have our guidance counselors around for constant. That's what I've tried to tell these people. They're not running off. They're going to still be there to help you with the college application process and that kind of thing. But there did seem to be a bit of consternation at the end of last year with the grading system. I believe at the high school it was one way and then another or something. I'm not clear. I don't have students at the high school.
And that was specific to forward learning. And again, that's an overhaul and a complete upgrade to what we did. You know, we survived the spring and got our students successfully to the finish line. But next, if we are in a situation like that, it is a completely different scenario. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Krauser, there's a lot of unknowns that are coming out here tonight, and I know you're coming out with a plan, and August 3rd we're voting on this. Let's say we don't approve this. Is there any thought to delaying the start of school?
We've talked about that a little bit, and we believe that a sooner start of school is better than a later start of school, and here's why. I believe, and the conventional wisdom, and I'm not a big fan necessarily of conventional wisdom, but the conventional wisdom is at some point COVID-19 is going to have a more devastating impact on society in general toward October, November. So the more time we get in right now, the more face time we'll have with students. So that's why we deliberately decided not to delay the opening.
So regardless of whether this thing gets approved or not, we're pushing forward with an open.
If what the health and
safety, the plan that we're voting on August 3rd,
right? If we
don't approve that, we have 16 days effectively to get something in place, right? So is there contingencies in place? What, are we gonna have another meeting? I don't know the feeling of the board, but the tone of the questions tells me there's a lot more open-ended items than certainties here. So,
Well,
what do we do?
the motion says that if we do not approve that or the administration is not prepared, it's an online option.
Is that what okay, so that's what it says. So we go full online, and is that forward or cyber, or is it just forward?
Well, they'd be one and the same at that point if it's the start of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't have in-person learning without an approved plan. That's the state requirement. Without an approved health and safety plan, students are not allowed to engage in in-person learning.
Okay.
Would that also affect sports then too at that point in time? If we're not ready to open on the 19th because we don't have a plan that's been approved?
We could be in the strange situation of having an approved approved extracurricular plan, but not an approved in-person instruction.
Yeah, I know, I get that. That's what one of those things I find very frustrating, to say the least.
It's unlikely, but I mean, it's certainly a possibility.
But we don't have to have our plan technically approved, if I'm reading this correctly, until the day before school starts, theoretically, or the 16th, something like theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, up to PD. I don't know how long it takes them to approve a plan.
They're not in the approval game on this.
They just want to have the plan.
Yeah, it's
okay.
The board approval is the last step.
Okay.
Well, what are we approving now? What are we going to approve something now?
You're approving the plan to move to the hybrid model based on the approval in 2 weeks of the formal opening plan.
Right. That was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. Yeah.
Which
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I had a question about the hybrid, opening for the first day for mostly the high school with freshmen and link crew. Would they be able, the whole freshman class, be able to go that first day for their orientation? And if so, would link crew be trained to show them how they should be walking in the hallways, transitioning to classroom, and that kind of stuff?
Yes, Carly, and I see Dr. Ellis chiming in, so he'll answer this, but to your question, yes.
Carly, certainly. I've looked at a bunch of different models for how we could bring all the freshmen in and the link crew advisors and somehow still be able to social distance. The total number of people would be less than we would have on a normal day in this hybrid model, so we certainly can make it work, but the specifics of how we would do it and exactly what the day would look like, it wouldn't look the same as your link crew day did a couple years ago, but there is a couple different ideas that we have for how to make that work for everyone.
And just to echo that in regards to the calendar as well, that Wednesday is a transition day for the district, so it does involve K 3 to 5 and 6 and 9. Those would all operate. The 3 to 5 student would operate at a split. It wouldn't be all the students on their first transition day. It would still involve a transition day, similar to what Carly was asking about.
What would you be doing with kindergartners? I mean, they're the newest of the new students. I mean, how do you do this?
It's
and make sure they get computers and all this other kind of.
It's the same thing that happens, every year with the transition day. It's focused on just that. It's a transition, and administratively, we had this conversation this year more than ever. It is the most important, and I'll use the 9th grade or the 6th grade. That spring, which was typically a spring up day where they had a chance to go visit and it didn't happen. So their ability to transit into the building with a smaller group and smaller segment will be even more so important. The 3 to 5 segment that transition as that intermediate group, we would split that in half or come up with an alternative to transition those students, either just 3rd grade or a transition into those groups.
Okay. Just one final question. You're asking us to follow up on what Lois Ann said. You want us to approve a hybrid plan tonight, but we don't know what that final hybrid plan is, because it may have changes, but we're approving a concept more than a real plan.
What you're approving is the way we open school. Next, on the 3rd of August, you'll be approving the health and safety plan, which is required to do in-person instruction. So what you're approving tonight is a hybrid mode of instruction, pending approval of the health and safety plan on August 3rd.
Pending. So this is just giving you the go ahead, figure out all the details.
Start the logistics and start planning out how that's going to unfold as far as students who are going to be in which program.
Have we had an attempt to contact any of these parents who have been sending us letters recently to address personally any of their concerns, or did Dr. Krauser attempt to cover some of that in his presentation, which I think was very good and very thoughtful? Just curious.
Yeah, both Dr. Krauser and I have talked to a handful of parents. We can't talk to them all because the volume of email is really high. I had a couple of parents in my office today talking about various things related to the opening. And they were good conversations. They were productive, fruitful, and they shared some interesting ideas that I hadn't thought about, but they don't impact the opening plan. It impacts some other things in scenarios, their particular scenarios. So we have incorporated commentary in the changes that we'll be making and putting into the health and safety plan. People have been relatively understanding about the condition we find ourselves in. And opinions are really all over the place.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Would it be, I'm wondering if it would be appropriate, given that we had 3 or 4 public comments tonight, if an administration could reach out to those 4 people, since they took the time to write a comment that was, a public comment, to reach out and make sure that their questions and concerns have been satisfied. Would that be appropriate?
Perhaps.
Well, I just, a thought popped in my head that it might be nice to reach out, since they did take the time to comment to the board.
Yeah.
I'll leave it, I'll leave that up to you. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, they made their points known. We've taken them into consideration. There may be some things that we want to ask them about specifically, and in which case we would reach out for more clarification.
I promise no more questions, but I'm sitting here. If you leave me sit here think long enough, I think of something. I understand the models that you have given us, the hybrid. Did you at any time consider, I don't know, half day each, half the kids go in the morning, half the kids go in the afternoon, or have we, it seems to me we've always wound up talking about this hybrid model. Was there ever serious thought to doing some other kinds of things that were out there? And I know there are probably any of them.
Yes, we spent a tremendous amount of time vetting a variety of different options. A model such as that, where you've got half in the morning, half in the noon. We vetted options about, full weeks of consistency, on and off weeks, and a variety of other different models. But based on the instructional planning for the teachers and the instructional learning of the students, or the learning of the students, this was the model that we felt best fit both of those, as well as satisfying the health and safety plan, and the physical distancing and the safety cleaning and the practices and protocols we need to put in place.
Okay, thank you.
So if there are no more questions.
John, I don't have questions, but I have comments.
All right, go for it.
So first, I'd like to say that I appreciate all the work that was obviously put into this plan. I am disappointed that we have not found a way to move forward with a 5-day schedule. In my opinion, we as a school district, as a board, we do not accomplish our mission of educating our students properly in any format except for 5 days a week in the classroom. I think I applaud the TOP program for other reasons, because I think economically that is something we've needed to do for a long time so that we can stop money from leaving this district. So I'm very happy that that was developed. In my opinion, both online and hybrid are non-optimal educational options. The amount of questions that came up tonight, clarifications, scenarios is not really astounding, but we have a whole lot of things that we have no idea how we're going to deal with, and we will get no guidance from anyone to help us with our liabilities or any of the other things that are going to happen. It is my opinion, my crystal ball may or may not be working, but I think it's very likely that within the next month before we start school, we will be either mandated as a state that there will be no in-person instruction, or York County will get returned to the red phase in which there will be no in-person instruction. And all of the effort that we have just put into this will be for naught. I find hybrid from a financial responsibility of this district to be the absolute most expensive option that we can pursue for very little upside, I want to say, over an online option. I think they're both bad, but there's not a lot of upside for a lot of cost. I think what we need to do, I think we cannot control what happens around us. And the one option that we can pick that we can count on not being changed is fully online. And that's where we ought to start. I think it saves us tremendous amounts of money going into this. Stops us from spinning our wheels on all the things that are going to change every day, every minute, as we've said, and gives us just a baseline that we can actually work on. And when all these other things work themselves out, when other schools go back, we can watch them have the struggles and the problems, and we can learn from them. And when we see what's really going to shake out, then we can join them in in-person instruction. I just don't see that we have any of the answers that we need to do this right. We're opening ourselves up to tremendous liability, and we're doing it at tremendous cost to the district. So I will not support a hybrid reopening plan.
Okay, thank you. So then the administration has recommended the hybrid reopening plan. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. We've been talking about this for a while, but do you have any other comments?
I would just like to say that Mike, thank you very much for your comments. I tend to agree with a lot of them. I'm still struggling with voting yay or nay for a hybrid. I don't know, but thank you for your comments, Mike.
John, I've got a few comments, and I echo a lot of what Mike said. This is a program, and look, I applaud the effort, but we don't have an idea. We have an estimate of what this is going to cost. We're already faced with a structural deficit, even in a normal operating environment. I have in my head at least $750,000 of incremental cost that's sitting there, and that's our estimate coming into it. I guarantee you it's going to be a lot higher. We have liabilities that we can't measure sitting with this. Again, I'm going to echo the fact I'm disappointed we don't have a 5-day option, or what. It's not even talked about in this plan. And what would be needed to move to that? We're the only Western country that is not fully reopening when it's been proven successfully overseas that that's the best option that works. We have a state government, primarily the governor's office, that again is pushing mandates down on us, layering us with costs, and then running away from explaining to us how that's supposed to work. That's not right. They're squeezing us more and more. They're putting us more and more in a deficit, and we don't have the money to do this. I like the top effort, and I'm surprised we didn't talk about what the cost save is on that. Ellen, you're asking the question, what's the cost per student? It's got to be lower than what it is for in-person instruction. It's got to be. If there's a return on, some level of return on investment on that I can get my arms around and understand spending the $150,000 per semester. But just to spend it willy-nilly without that, well, what can we do as a cost save? And what does that mean? You know, these are all pie in the sky efforts, but we're spending money we don't have. We're incurring liabilities potentially that we don't know how to measure. And we're taking educators, frontline workers. I'm sorry, I don't know how many of the educators in this room went to school for that. I don't think any of you did. You went to school to educate our kids. And this plan doesn't educate our kids. This plan is a tactic. It's a tactic that it's just disappointing that we're in this situation. I am not voting for this. Online option is the only thing that's safe right now. I can't in good conscience push forward with this, and I echo Mr. Tillman's comments.
Thank you. So I guess we are ready for a roll call vote.
Sure. Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Tillman,
No.
Mr. Sears,
No.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Aye. Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
No.
Mr. Posdown,
Yes.
Mr. Scalette,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes.
6-3.
Okay. I echo a lot of the concerns, but I don't think an online education, you know, if the goal is to maximize the educational opportunities while minimizing risk, I don't think jumping to online is the way to go. But we'll see what the state does in the next 2 weeks. So with that,
So the next item is asking for approval of a revision to the 2020-21 calendar. You may recall last time we talked about taking 2 days, the Monday and Tuesday of Christmas week, and converting them to Act 80 days so that we can shift some professional development we're going to need at the beginning of the school year and use those days in December to take care of the staff development we were going to do at the beginning of the year when we initially made this calendar. Also on this calendar, we are eliminating a number of early dismissals on Fridays during the year, because now Friday becomes an integral day as part of the hybrid learning process. So we're asking for approval on this calendar.
So moved.
Second.
questions or comments? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
And the next item is policy 204 attendance. You may recall that the state legislature has changed the compulsory attendance age. It used to be 8 years old to 17. Now it's 6 to 18. So it requires us to modify the policy. And in that process, we also took some language that PSBA recommends for this policy. The last time we changed this policy about a year ago, prior to the changes from the state legislature. So now we're asking you to approve these changes in the policy. Not tonight. This is a first read. So you'll have a chance to think about it, chew on it, and ask questions of myself between now and next month. So the bulk of the changes, though, are related to compulsory attendance ages.
Did this go through policy?
We haven't had a policy committee meeting because of shutdown back in the spring. The next policy committee meeting is after school opens. in September. So that's why we want to run this through the process this way. I mean, there are other policies that need revision too, but I'd rather them run through the normal committee route.
Okay.
So please feel free to be in touch with questions you have about this policy if you have any. I think it's fairly cut and dry, but please review the red line copy. It's been constructed in such a way that you can see the proposed changes and the proposed deletions. And the next item is, I think we'll start with Dr. Stoltz from the elementary division, and then we'll move to Mrs. Jackson from the secondary division. Dr. Stoltz.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing. I just want to share 3 things going on over the summer. The first block is for our elementary students. We were unable to have summer school or summer library that we've had over the past few years. So being that the majority of our students had their Chromebooks at home, we offered them a summer learning board for learning opportunities in ELA and STEAM and different opportunities like that. I kept waiting for rainy days this summer to send out those reminders to the kids. So hopefully they took advantage of some of those learning opportunities. And then for any parents that are listening this evening, we will be collecting the Chromebooks back up. A reminder went out today. August 3rd through the 5th, there are different opportunities for parents to hand their Chromebook and the chargers back in so that we can get them ready for fall, which is right around the corner. While our students hopefully were doing some learning and having fun in the summer, our professional staff was also learning, and they were engaged in online learning using EduPlanet. Provided the PD, professional development, this summer as we are heading towards our huge curriculum rewrite under the leadership of Dr. Krauser, using a backwards design. So teachers work through online learning like many of our students as well. And then finally, the last block, this comes off of in the summer when many of us first learned about what happened with George Floyd. Many of us had a lot of time and continue to have a lot of moments of reflection. And as I reflected as a principal of a primary building, I tried to think, what is my part in this? What's something that can be done proactively? And if I can draw your attention to the infogram that is shown there, I am a book person, and I was thinking about how we use books as windows and mirrors. That's not a term I came up with. That's a term I learned from Kelly Gallagher, a professional development developer, and he talks about how books are windows. It helps us see things beyond ourselves. Books also serve as mirrors and how we should see ourselves reflected. If you can look at the infogram, this is from Diversity in Children's Books. This is from 2018. It is showing that students see 50% white characters in the books that they are presented with. 27% animal characters. And as you go down that graph, it is showing that many of the students, and you know Yorkshire in particular, has a large amount of diversity in our school. Children aren't seeing themselves reflected in books. So I wrote to our wonderful Ed Foundation and asked if it's possible for them to consider a grant out of cycle, because grants are normally submitted by February. And they allowed me to submit a grant. So I was awarded a grant. It's written for Yorkshire and Valley View Elementary for our teachers in kindergarten, first and second grade to be gifted with books. And they are books. I used a source such as diversebooks.org. I was looking for books in which children of all ethnicities are shown as main characters, and I was looking for authors, minority authors as well, award-winning books. So I'm excited to get those books in teachers' hands just so that all of students can see themselves reflected in books. So thank you all for this opportunity to share some positivity with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoltz.
You're welcome.
And Mrs. Jackson.
Good evening, everyone. So at the high school in June and July, we had a total of 4 separate days that families could come and drive by to drop off or pick up items that the students still had in their possession. We had a total of over 1,200 items collected over those 4 days, which might sound like a very huge number, but we are left with nearly that is still out there. So we will be making appeals to families between now and the start of school to drop off items to our high school office and communicating that out shortly. We had over 25 staff members volunteer on one or multiple days to be involved in that. Maintaining, of course, safety precautions as we did. We had families and students stay in their cars and then collected their items. So that was obviously fun to see our kids, even if it was in such a strange way of connecting with them again. And of course, the staff enjoyed being able to be in person with one another and talk. Our Trojan Theater has been busy this summer working on a production. Their production will occur virtually. And just today, a few of them, handful, were at the high school and they were practicing social distancing throughout the school, communicating with one another through their phones. And that was great to see. The 3 administrators, we've been very busy making plans that tackle a lot of the what ifs that were brought up tonight, the hurdles of the changes as they continue to develop. And of course, we expect to be quite busy doing that as well throughout the rest of the summer here. And I don't want to step on Carly's toes. There's a lot of great things that are actually happening this summer, but we do have driver's ed back up and we have some sports that are practicing.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Jackson. Any questions for our 2 administrators tonight? Okay. And I believe that concludes the superintendent's report.
Mr. Chuli.
Okay, we have several items for board consideration. I may ask Mr. Gerling to chime in a little bit on several of these items. The first item are Crabtree change orders for the middle school music wing and capital improvement projects. If you recall, during our June Property and Finance Committee, we did review some change orders that would de-scope the project. And so we would delay parts of the project that we had initially planned. And so these change orders reduced the contract by $1.2 million.
So you'd like a motion?
Yes, please.
So moved.
So moved. This is Ellen. Second.
Okay, questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
Okay, this will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The second change order is dealing with the East York and Indian Rock floor project. You did receive some information on this project. So there are 2 components to the change order. The first component removed the existing epoxy flooring finish that was unstable before the new flooring finishes could be installed. And that change order is about $10,075 And then the second component of the change order addresses some small amounts of asbestos identified in the library at East York Elementary. The amount is not significant to have an official removal, but it does require some skim coating before the new flooring can be installed. Are there any questions related to this item?
Okay, then I guess could we have a motion?
So moved. Ellen.
Second.
Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The next set of change order, or the next set of a change order is for the high school gymnasium floor project. And this change order reduces the contract amount by $3,809.80. And this is because we had purchased materials and so it reduced the requirements from the contractor.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
Okay. This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item D is the WellSpan agreement for athletic training services. This is a 3-year contract. The first year, 2021, is a flat rate at the 1920, and then years 2 and 3 reflect a 2.5% increase. And we would recommend this for board vote.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item E is a service agreement with the Lincoln IU Unit 12. We do have students placed in the locations listed below. The estimates that you see is the district share of the salary and benefits for the additional teacher's assistant.
Motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions?
Can you tell us how many students are involved in these 6 locations or something? I mean, I know it says it's based on the enrollment, but how much of the enrollment is us?
I would have to defer to Natalie.
I don't know if she's around or not. Natalie here tonight?
She was on earlier, but
I am here and I don't have those numbers in front of me. The classrooms typically have no more than 12 students in them. So when I just look at the numbers and make a guess, but I can certainly find the numbers, I would say those that are around 5,000 probably have about 10 students in them. The one that's about 10,000 probably has about 5 students in them. But our number of students in each of those classes is probably 1 to 2 at most.
Okay, thank you.
so this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item F is a service agreement to allow the Lincoln IU to provide language instructions for our out-of-district placements. This is at a rate of $92 per hour. There is no increase from prior year. And we have about 4 students that receive this service. There's a potential for more.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The last service agreement for the IU is for the non-pub consortium to comply with the Title I program requirements.
Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowen, thanks for hanging in there.
Hi, everyone. So at the high school, for student council, through Minithon, we've been participating in doing flamingo flocks in people's yards. If you've seen that throughout your neighborhood, that's us. And also the Greenhouse Club is just raising money to try to get their greenhouse in the high school. And that's all I have for my report today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? Where are we going to put the greenhouse at the high school if you raise the money?
I am not sure yet. Maybe in my next report, I can get someone to tell me where they're thinking of putting it.
Thank you.
And there is a link here to the committee meeting schedule. And then for Personnel Committee, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Good. You have before you the personnel report, which includes resignation, employment, granting of tenure, athletics, extracurricular, and leave of absence. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Okay, do I get to ask a question now? Did you take a breath?
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay. Under the leave of absence, are we able to get a substitute given our current conditions for this teacher, or how's that going to work? I'm just curious.
Excellent question, Ellen.
Well, it's just, I don't know who that would be. Dr. Ella, I don't know who it is, or Dr. Krause, or.
I can chime in. Yes,
there you go.
Yeah, the building principals are in tune with those absences, and we will work through ASOP and STS to get a sub for that.
I was just interested, given the current situation. I don't know how subbing is going to work.
Yeah, I will say that STS has been extremely helpful in getting subs, and they're also very active in helping us. So I don't see an issue at this point.
Good, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Are there any other questions?
And I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
I'm sorry, I didn't get who's second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Ellen did, but maybe not.
Oh, I will. I'll take a second. Go ahead. Sure, put me down.
Okay. This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Mr. Posnell?
Yes.
I think by approving the hiring of Coach Kemp for boys basketball, we may well be the first organization to have a brother and sister who are head basketball coaches in the same building. Just a bit of trivia.
Go figure, huh? Okay.
Well, that concludes my report.
Do we have a legislative update?
Boy, do we ever. Even though the legislature is not in session right now, you may be aware, if you get the legislative updates and actually read them, that you can send a letter to Senator Toomey and Senator Casey asking them to support the HEROES Act, which includes emergency funding for schools. If you do this, you'll get 1 or 1.5 page responses from each senator outlining all the great things they're doing for us. In addition, Representative Scott Perry is having a town hall meeting Wednesday evening at 5:05 p.m. If you want to attend that meeting, please let me know and I can forward you the information if you don't have it already. And as you may remember, before COVID-19 changed life as we know it, there was a bill moving through the legislature that would have mandated EKGs for all kids going out for sports who might have a heart condition. That would be payable by the school. That legislation has been shelved in favor of an education program for athletes, but it has eliminated any unfunded mandate requiring school districts to pay for EKGs. That concludes my report if there are no questions.
Thank you. Ms. Farrar.
Yes, you have before you the Dawn's Early Light from the Lincoln Intermediate Board meeting of June 30th. For those who are interested, it gives you a little capsule of what is going on out at the LIU. And I know that they have been busy moving forward and getting ready for the coming year. The Joint Operating Authority, which is in charge of the York Learning Center, has not met recently, so I have no report there. And York Adams Academy, I have no report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. York County School of Technology.
Yes, things moving right along nicely at the School of Technology. We have a meeting Thursday night and an opportunity to tour the construction site of the new gymnasium that's under construction. Looks like January for an anticipated completion date. And that concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Thank you. You have links to the district calendar here as well as the board meeting schedule. And I believe we have a few more comments from previously. So please take a few minutes. And I think within there are a couple of specific questions. If Dr. Williams, if you could respond to those offline to him.
But I think, John, the last question is very telling. Are we going to have Bright Horizons this year? Dr. Williams or Dr. Krauser?
There's nothing that's keeping Bright Horizons from opening in our buildings right now.
Well, they have to follow the guidelines and all that stuff too, or yeah.
I'm sure they have their own hoops to jump through, but there's nothing that we're doing from preventing them from opening.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And if there are no other questions or comments, I believe we're done. Thank you for your patience, everybody.